know when we were both down in Florida, we never really kind of got to connect, and
Yeah.
I kind of regret it, to be honest with you. Now looking back at it, um, but I appreciate you hopping on here. And again, for those of you that don't know, Brandon and I went to the same high school. I think you graduated with Charlotte, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
Same
you
age.
graduated with my wife. Not very many people probably from where we're at are really not very many people are doing what I'm doing, but probably even less are doing what you're doing. Um,
I've been fortunate. Yeah.
yeah. So go ahead and just again appreciate it, and then go ahead and just give us like a background, what your title is, what your main like day to day role and responsibilities are, and then maybe even take us back to kind of what your progression has been to get to where you're at.
Okay. So yeah, I guess I can start with a progression. So I graduated high school and then I went to Frostburg State, a small Division III athletics college.
So
Studied out.
they're actually in our conference. They're a D2 school now, and they're actually in our conference. We play them
Okay.
every year in all of our sports. So
Perfect. So I went there when they were Division III and was an athletic training major, as well as did a lot of additional prerequisite courses to go to physical therapy school. Immediately following athletic training school, I went to University of Pittsburgh and worked and became and went to school for be a physical therapist with the emphasis on being a sports clinical specialist. So I wasn't extremely intrigued with the inpatient stuff and really wanted to stick in the sports realm, as you can tell. And along the time while I was in there, I took a lot of opportunity to work with uh, the Penguins. I was volunteering with them a lot, as well as just helping out in all sports. Helped out a little bit in their kind of weight room area just to kind of shadow and learn little bit more about strength and conditioning principles to apply into rehab. And immediately following PT school, what you can do is go to a clinical residency or an additional internship, essentially. So I was fortunate enough to do my residency position in Dallas, Texas, where you pursue a sports clinical specialist in physical therapy as well as work with high level athletics. That internship was specifically with the University of Texas of Dallas athletics, as well as the Dallas Stars all season, and a little bit here with the Mavericks and a little bit with the soccer team, just here and there as help. And then immediately following that, I essentially applied to every team that was in the league in hockey because I was ingrained in hockey at that point, and was fortunate enough to be hired as a physical therapist, assistant strength coach, athletic trainer, kind of a lot of tools. They needed one person to cover a lot of areas with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I spent 5 years in Tampa. It was great. Loved Florida. And I recently transitioned to my new role in New York, overseeing basically all rehab, essentially director of rehabilitation, day-to-day management of injuries, as well as blending the role of the transition of rehab to performance-based training in the gym. Um, so as long as kind of follow your thing here, roles and responsibilities. My day-to-day role is essentially director of rehab as well as anything acute and chronic. So if we have surgeries, if we have someone gets a groin strain, someone bangs up their MCL, I oversee the rehab as well as the manual therapy, any sort of diagnostics that need to be done, and then transition them to our strength staff and then continue on with their performance-based metrics. Um, I also assist a lot with kind of the objective measures that we're taking. So we use a lot of force plate testing. We have a Kangatech device. We have a Quantum that we use for rehab. We basically have any tool that you can think of. We have it. Our athletes are also tracked by first beat heart rate monitors, connects on GPS positional trackers for speed and mechanical and physiologic loads. And they kind of get all the data, and then I assist in overseeing and kind of looking to see fatigue factors and what's going to make someone more susceptible to injury and along with their performance on the ice. That's a quick synopsis, but if you have
no,
questions, I guess I can try to dive into more of it for you.
yeah, no, I definitely will have you elaborate on some of that. So I want to go back. So when you were like in PT school, you wanted to work with specifically more like in the performance side of things. was hockey what you originally wanted to do? I mean, I assume you grew up like a hockey fan. That's kind of why you wanted to start into it. But was that like where you thought you were going to go like always, or was it something that because you got the opportunity in Dallas to just kind of get your feet wet in hockey, you stayed with it, or was it like kind of your goal from the beginning?
So my goal is to be in a high contact trauma sport. I find it a little more exciting, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity with either the Dallas Stars, and I was actually offered a position with the Pittsburgh Steelers as an intern with them. It was a tough decision, and decided to go with hockey. And fortunately, it's worked out for me in the long run, choosing hockey for where I've gotten today. But it was between hockey and football, kind of my whole. And I didn't play either sport growing up. I just wasn't just loved working with those athletes, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that I think it's cool. Like, and again, that's partly like you're obviously the first coach that we've had that isn't, or the first person that's the performance person that's in the hockey realm. And obviously, like I watch hockey and I understand it, but from like I'm gonna have this as a question in a second, but like from like the hockey 101 in terms of the biomechanical, the metabolic demands, like things like that. I mean, I can look at it, but to have somebody that has experience with it is going to be pretty cool because it's very unique, and something that we just don't get to talk to people very often in that
Yeah.
field. Um, so before I get into the hockey itself, is there something that, and this is kind of start off with you personally, and then maybe how that plays into since you are in that director of rehab role um, with the Rangers, like what kind of overarching like standards or principles do you have? What kind of standards and principles does the organization have? Does the rehab side of things? Does the S&C, like sports medicine, like all the way down through S&C? Like what kind of consistent standards do you guys have across the board?
So for our organization specifically, we have what we call a performance team, which is essentially a number of heads of departments as well as people working underneath. So we have a head athletic trainer who I work side by side with as the director of rehab. We have a assistant athletic trainer and another athletic trainer massage therapist. From the strength and conditioning principal, we have a head strength coach as well as two assistant strength coaches. We have a full-time dietitian, a full-time data analysis person, I guess just to say. He kind of dives deep into the computer engineering stuff for us. And we have a full-time sports psychologist that kind of engulfed the team, what we call the performance team. So we kind of work together on all aspects of everything. So if say somebody gets hurt, we obviously get some scans. We evaluate what it's going to be, make a judgment call on what we think if it needs surgery or not, and then essentially give a timetable to the GM and ownership and say, this guy's going to be out 3 to 5 weeks. Here's what we think is wrong. Here's why we think it's wrong. Here's how we're going to get them better. And here's how medical is going to get them better. Here's how strength conditioning is going to program maybe upper body because they have a lower body injury. Here's how Brandon's going to transition them back to strength conditioning performance in the lower body. Here's what we need to do from a nutrition standpoint as far as supplementation, vitamins, anything that they should be taking to help increase tissue healing, metabolic stuff. And then if they have any sort of mental health issues, we can also refer them to our psychologist, I should say. But I would say from an overarching standard, I mean, our goal is to get them back as soon as possible, but also not as soon as possible in the fact that they have the ability to get hurt at the same time. So we take a lot of metrics from our preseason testing, compare them to return to play, and we do a lot of preseason screening. I kind of assist them with that, but trying to achieve that goal of what they were before, if not better, if they're going to go back. So we always look to not just get them back to their current level, but possibly better than what they were before to prevent anything further happening in the future.
Right, I got you. So we'll kind of go into the hockey because obviously I would definitely want to get into like that initial evaluation, that kind of that upfront here, especially if you guys sign somebody new, or
Yeah.
how do you kind of assess them from the get-go, and then how do you monitor things throughout the season, throughout the year? But just to back up from that kind of big picture, like how would you summarize, and you can go as deep, like physiologically, anatomically as you want. How would you summarize basically like the biomechanical loads, the metabolic demands? Like obviously hockey's, 30 seconds to a minute of high
Yeah.
intensity activity, and then they're doing the line change, getting swapped out. technical things. What are kind of maybe some common, if you read certain people's books, like call them like movement archetypes and things like that. Like are all hockey guys the exact same? Is there positions that are similar? What, just again, however deep or shallow you want to go with that. Basically, just what is a hockey player? I guess like from a performance and anatomical physiological standpoint.
I like to think of treating a hockey player as basically a football player on a quarter-inch piece of steel. Um, their metabolic and biomechanical demands are more lower body, I should say, for due to the propulsive power they have to generate to create movement on the ice. But also they have to be able to react to trauma, getting slammed into the boards. You don't have to fight if you don't want to, but there's things that are going to happen out there. It is a very anaerobic sport, like you said. A normal shift is probably 37 to 40 seconds. Now you can get trapped out there for 2 minutes and be sucking wind and 2x4s for legs, but your average shift anywhere is going to be between 30 and 45 seconds, and then you're 2-3 minutes off, maybe longer, depending on how important of a player you are. So they have to make as much of an impact as they can in 30 seconds. So it's up and down the ice maybe a couple times, and they're changing for the next guy. So we're training speed, we're training power, and we're training kind of that anaerobic system because they need to be powerful on the ice to generate speed. Because if you hop on and you don't have any fast twitch fibers that are adapted to that, you're just going to be behind the play. The game keeps getting faster and faster. I would say even in the 6-7 years I've been in it, I've noticed that the players are getting a little bit smaller, but getting faster on the ice. So we have a wide range of players. One guy is 170. We have another guy that's 240. I mean, they're all different sizes out there, but if you look at like a rundown of every team, your average size male hockey player in the NHL is 6 foot, 6'1", 200 to 204 pounds on every team. That's kind of the average. There are teams that are a little bit lighter, a little bit heavier, but that's where you're going to find kind of your general 200-pound, 6-foot male that's out there.
Like a safety in football or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. So you're training. Their demands are speed, power, as well as underlying strength to prevent injury. So we're always looking at different pathways of generating force through different fascial slings, different planes of motion. And I would say that it's less upper body, that's more preventative, more lower body specific and core training to prevent injury and overuse stuff. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does answer a lot. It answers a lot. And anytime somebody throws out the word or the phrase fascial slings, like I don't know if no offense to the other four people on this call, but I don't know how often they hear that term. That was something we talked about. We talked about it a lot when I was with the Rockies, and it's definitely something that I probably have not dug deep enough into myself, but I get the gist of it to at least from a surface level. So if we have time at the end, maybe I'll ask a follow up on that. So you mentioned like the demands of the sport and kind of the archetypes of the players and things like that. What are some? I would assume these guys are usually probably quad dominant, kind of tight low backs because they're in that kind of bent over position a lot. Like, what are some common, acute injuries, common chronic overuse type of injuries? What are obviously concussions, any type of collision type injury, but what are some of the most common things that you deal with?
The most common things that I would say from a chronic overuse standpoint would be groin strains, your adductor related issues due to muscle imbalances in the pelvis, as well as just overuse of every time you're dragging that steel across the ice, you're essentially eccentrically and concentrically shaping it across the ice constantly. So if they have an imbalance in the posterior fibers of glute med and stuff, they're going to have issues with their groins. You're going to find a little bit of overuse stuff in your obliques, not as much as like when you were with baseball, such a common thing in baseball. And then I would say the most chronic, like the most acute things you're going to see are shoulder pathology, whether that be an AC joint separation, shoulder dislocation, MCL sprains much more than ACL, just due to they don't get caught in the ice. Rarely, I should say. Like, you're not going to have the pivot shift on the ice because the ice kind of gives out on you, but you are going to create that valgus torque that's going to cause an MCL sprain a lot. And then shifting down you're going to have high ankle sprains, which are common, much more rather than inversion or eversion ankle sprains due to the locked nature of the boot. Their foot kind of sits in that skate and it acts like a walking boot. So you're not going to get that inversion, eversion, but you are going to get the shearing of the syndesmotic space between the tibia and fibula. And I guess I'll back to chronic. On top of groins, you're also going to get labral pathology of the hip because of the shear forces that you're creating over time. And backing this back up to, they start skating. If you're a professional hockey player, you probably started when you were 4 on the ice. These guys have been skating their entire life. And due to that, when you're young, you have your bones are forming, they're changing, they're Wolff's law, they're adapting to the bone, the muscle pulling on the bone. So what happens is they seem to all get these enormous cam and pincer lesions of the hip. And then over time, they're going to shear their labrums. Because they were skating so much at a young age, those bones are pulling and kind of creating these overarching pincer acetabulums, as well as widening the cam and creating a bigger femoral. So you're going to get a lot of labral pathology of the hip, and that's a lot of in-season management, as well as coaching the importance of mobility and strengthening around the pelvis to prevent that. Now, some guys are going to have those tears and you just got to fix them. It's just preventing them or prolonging that as long as possible till the end of their career.
Right. So again, I don't want to get too off on topic on this, but one thing that I remember, are you familiar with, and I'm sure you are, I don't know if you guys utilize it, but like the functional range conditioning approach, the hip cars, shoulder cars, pails and rails, things like that.
We use those daily.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask, because obviously I know that's something that like Dr. Spina talks about, of just the maintenance of the labrum and getting blood. You have to constantly get blood flow to those tissues because they get so limited blood supply as it is. And that was something we did when I was with the Rockies. We did, I mean, like I said, every day as well, with especially the hip, the spine, shoulder girdle. One thing and we do it at Fairmont as well. Some of our teams don't do it just because it's more of like I think you have to have a little bit of, there's like a maturity aspect and a buy-in aspect to do it right. But I'd say at least half our teams do it. At least do the most watered down version of hip, shoulder, and some sort of spinal segmentation. One thing that we had a lot this year with football, we have like probably 3-4 guys that I can think of that had AC joints and shoulder dislocations and labral tears. Yeah. And, and it's talking to our trainer, our head trainer, and our football coach. And again, like, is there anything at all that we can do to prevent those things when it comes to like a collision sport? I mean, our wide receiver is diving for a ball and his shoulder pops out. He's then the one that he gets it repaired and then he's blocking somebody and his shoulder pops out. Like, is there anything at all from a injury mitigation standpoint that we could be doing better other than just strength training and mobility training? I mean, is there something I'm missing?
I mean, you caught me at a good time because I just took a course on shoulder. So that I picked up a couple new things that I want to use for, like you said, if they're out here, they're in a provocative position. They get hit this way, his shoulder's coming forward. They get hit this way, shoulders going backward. The underlying thing is you want to get the rotator cuff muscles and the supporting muscular around that as much volume and hypertrophy as you can, as well as functional strength. Right. I mean, they can sit here and do this all day, but can they do it in a sports specific manner? And what we've found is that I Kangatech, which is a force plate reading handheld dynamometer. It's a very fancy handheld dynamometer for like a Vald force frame. It's a Kangatech version, another Australian force frame.
Okay. Yeah.
So we do external, internal rotation at 90 degrees and look at their ratios for whether they're an elite level athlete. You're looking for your external range of motion to be about 80% of your internal rotation, 75, 80%, but not just looking at their ratio, but how much peak force and rate of force development they can create. Because if they can create a high peak force, but they can't create that rate quickly, they're not going to be able to react to those trauma. Now we are fortunate enough to have these fancy machines that can measure all that. So what I look at is their ability to create an external rotation moment. Is you basically want to be able to lift 2 newtons per kilo. It's 2.0. I can send you the data on it. So you want to be able to, and then your rate of force development needs to be greater than 600. Average is 500, pass is 400. So we look at those things. And then there's also a test, which I like even more. It's a little bit more setup. We use on our force. We have a Hawkins force plates, so we use that for our counter movement jumps and plyo push up, different things. It's called an ASH test. So you're testing I, Y, T. So you're looking at how much peak force they can create in these position specific areas. It should be 2.0 here, 1.7 here, 1.5 here, but also looking at their rate of force development in all those positions. And if they're weak up here or out here, they're not going to be able to prevent that. So we had a couple guys dislocate in previous. So I've been training them up here, out here, and out here, not just doing this all day.
Right. So, and when I was with the Yankees, they were doing the because see, when I was with the Rockies, we had the Sparta force plates, and we really only did like the counter movement jumps. We didn't do a lot of anything else. We didn't play around with them, I guess, is what you could kind of say a little bit. We were pretty much sticking to what Sparta kind of recommended. But when I was with the Yankees, which is why one of the things that when I was down in Tampa, they were kind of just starting to implement like the ASH test. So I was able to see a couple guys do it, and obviously at Fairmont we're not there yet, but we actually do have a professor that's might be bringing in some force plates.
Okay.
But, so I guess from a functional training standpoint, are you talking like a lot of like bottoms up type presses from different angles, a lot of like our baseball guys are doing like some of the plyo care, like reverse throws, like the dribble drops, things like that, like some dynamic work, not just like you said, not like some of the perturbations from that kind of those different shoulder angles and things like that.
So I would get to that later on, but backing it way back, almost a very boring isometric, heavy isometric holds, yielding isometrics and overcoming isometrics. Just to be able to build that strength to a level that we feel like their peak force is there, and then applying some functional movement to that. So as simple as it sounds, it's called a remaker, or you can get a different thing. It's a carabiner thing that you put on it. I put on a chain and I have them go. It doesn't go anywhere. Yep. And then they sit there and watch the phone, and I say, your peak force is 150. I need you to train 70-75% of that for 10-second holds. And it's simple and it's boring, and they look at me like, what the fuck am I doing? But then afterwards they're like, oh my God, my shoulder's tired. I'm like, yeah, because you can't isometrically hold that volition forever, and we need to train that. So then we'll do some yielding isometrics, kind of just against the wall, holding 10% of their body weight, and just being able to hold that 6, 7, 8 reps of 10 seconds. And you can increase it, obviously, as well as following it up with some capacity hold training. So in those I, T, and Y ASH positions, they encourage you to train capacity holds in those positions at about 2% of your body weight, and hold it for, if you can get 90 seconds, they say that's great. But a lot of guys really struggle to do that. I mean, for me to hold,
are you just having them lay on the ground, or are you laying them like off a bench? Like, how are you? Like,
I'm laying them prone, head on a block, and just straight out.
Okay.
So that seems very elementary in this, as far as that rehab, but it's just building the underlying more hypertrophy of those 4 cuff muscles and the surrounding musculature to try to prevent anything in the future. Now, if it happens, it happens. You can blow out your shoulder anytime.
Right.
And then what we do is we back it down and we kind of work isometrics to concentrics that overload. I do a lot of long, steady eccentric training. Kind of once I get going, after they're pretty good with isos, I'll go to eccentric training and then concentrics. And then I'll use we have an isokinetic device that I'll use sometimes too, that you don't need one of those. I use it because it's over there.
Right. No, it's awesome. I mean, obviously you guys, it's great that you guys have all the tools at your disposal, and again, that's something that with just the way our situation is with being at a small D2, we only have we got 400 plus student athletes. I'm the only full-time strength coach. We got a GA, an assistant, maybe I might be getting another GA, and we have 4 athletic trainers. So it's just one of those things where, it's a very skeleton crew with very limited equipment. One thing that I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you've seen this or not, or if it's changed, but I know a couple of years ago, also when I was down in Florida and I was working at a private gym down there, we read a research article. We were looking at like EMG studies for the shoulder girdle.
Yeah.
And the thing that on there that ignited the EMGs the most for the rotator cuff was, which again, EMGs are sometimes questionable depending if everything's set up right, but was just like doing basically like deadlifts, like anything where you're grabbing something and you're having
Yeah.
to like deadlifts, farmer's carries, suitcase carries,
Yeah.
again, the bottoms up stuff. Is that stuff that then like your strength coaches are used? I mean, obviously you're deadlifting not just for rotator cuff health, but is that something that you've also like, is there some truth to that definitely like lifting heavy stuff also elicits like a lot of
Yeah.
rotator cuff activity?
So there's a few studies out there that bottom up for the cuff is actually, so if you do an external, if I put you on the frame and had you push out like this, hand open, and then I had you clench and push out, you're going to go up 10 to 15% just
Right.
because of the neural drive to your hand.
Right. Yep.
If you can increase the neural drive distally, it's going to help kind of the muscles up here, which it seems silly, but just doing this versus this, it's a huge difference.
No, it makes sense. I mean, when we talk about like heavy lifting, we talk about like the law of irradiation, like creating tension throughout your whole body and things like that. So I think that makes complete sense. That was awesome. I don't want to get any further down the rabbit hole in the shoulder because Cressy did a whole, I remember a couple years ago, Cressy put out an entire like webinar that was like a week long on the shoulder health. So in terms of like the performance-based metrics, like what kind of things are you guys doing? Like when you first bring guys in, when you maybe move guys up from the AHL, or I'm sure you're actually probably already getting some data on those guys even down at that level as well. But when you guys bring stuff in, like what's those baseline tests? And then like, are you guys doing like FMS screen or anything like that? And then what, not to diminish some of the other stuff, but like, what do you think, like if you maybe had to narrow it down to like, I'm going to do these 2 or 3 tests only, like what would be the most valuable things? Like, what do you, especially from your standpoint, from like not only a performance side, but also like trying to mitigate injuries, and not, I guess maybe don't get into like the LPS, like the workload stuff yet, because that's kind of a separate topic, but just from an assessment standpoint, what are the biggest bang for your buck things that you guys do?
So we do our same screening on every player at training camp. So every player gets a baseline, everything. So if I think about it here, we do height, weight, pinches, actually getting rid of pinches because our team just bought a DEXA scanner, which is overkill, but we're getting rid of pinches. So we do body fat with a DEXA scan. We do a mobility assessment, not FMS, but we have what's called an output device where it basically just, say you're measuring shoulder range of motion, it clips to your wrist.
Yeah, they also use, like I literally just got off the call with a guy on Friday.
They do velocity-based training too.
Yeah, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about then. Okay,
So that output, so they do velocity. You can use it for velocity training, or you can do it for range of motion assessments. So we'll do like internal, external rotation, hip internal, external rotation, dorsiflexion measurement against the wall, and that's kind of your. And we do a few other range of motion things, but that's a range of motion assessment. We then take them, tell them go warm up on the turf, warm up for a little bit, and then we immediately put them on a Kangatech device, and we do a hip profile and a miniature shoulder profile. So we get a max isometric contraction of the hip adductors and hook line, hip abductors and hook line, a max hip flexion and a max hip extension. So the hip flexion's hook line as well, they just pull up into the pad, and then we put them prone for hip extension, kind of knee bent straight up into the pad. And then we call that our hip profile. And then we use that data, and I can explain later. Then we have them in shoulder external internal rotation, max in, max out, send them to the next test. They then move on to, hold on, I'm thinking. They then do a lower strength assessment. So they do a max isometric. Oh no, sorry, they go directly to plyometrics. So then they do a broad jump, and then they do a counter movement jump on the force plates. So we get right versus left, we get peak force, rate of force developments, everything, but basically a counter movement jump.
Is the broad jump off of the plate, or is it just measuring distance?
That's just measured in distance. We only have one set of plates, so we keep it for actually we have 2 sets, but we use one set of plates for a max iso squat against the chain. So they're driving the force down into the plates against the chain. And then we use the other set of plates for a counter movement jump. So that's our kind of our lower body assessment, and we're actually adding one more test this year for, instead of only testing them in this plane, we're going to put them on a lateral skater push off. So on a slant, we put their foot against there, strap them to the 1080 machine, and get a full isokinetic power device pushing side to side, just like if they were going to push off their skate, to make it a little more sport specific. For upper body, we do a plyometric push up off the plates, and we do a ring chin test with 10% of their body weight attached to them. Just old school chin ups, just because our GM likes that.
For reps or for like an ISO hold?
For reps.
For reps.
And then for the plyo push up, we look at the same metrics as we do. We actually use the counter movement jump thing and just do a plyo push up on it, and it gives you the same output read. They're thinking about adding velocity based power test for the upper body, set a specific amount of body weight, throw it up there with the gym aware. It's what they do at the combine, so they're thinking about adding that. But that's kind of the and then on the ice, we do a skate test that the coach, whatever he wants to do. But then we also test using a 1080 sprint machine, which is just a cable we attach to the back of them. And they go from end line to far blue line. It's essentially a 4.8 to 5.5 second sprint, and we get a time. And it also gives us power output reads of right versus left strides.
So the same amount of tension on the 1080 for everybody.
Like we literally put like 1 kilo on there just so it has a little tug to it. We don't just so it gets the read. I think it's 1 or 2 kilos, then everybody gets the same. We're not really testing them pulling against it. We're just want it for the read of the speed.
Gotcha.
So that's our preseason assessment of everyone. And then we kind of dial it back, take a look at everything. I usually take a look at all the metric data. So I'll look at their hip profiles and decide if they have an imbalance of their adductors versus their abductors. So we're looking for, I like their adductors to be at least 85% of their abductor strength. And then also right versus left imbalances, we want to keep those within 10%. Because what happens a lot with our sport is sometimes they have a lot of strength in their right hip flexor, insufficient on the left, but their left hip extensor is really strong, so they create this torque balance, and it might be because they're right hand dominant, that's how they shoot. And what we want to do is reposition that to an equal amount, because a lot of times they're getting these overuse injuries due to their imbalances of their hips.
So that makes me think of 2 questions. And there's obviously, I think there's a little bit of debate about this, at least again, when I was with the Rockies, we debated about this quite a bit. The whole idea of asymmetries and imbalances.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the plyo push up, you mentioned like the counter movement jump. And obviously if you guys have hawking dynamics, you got like the dual force plates. Is that something that you guys factor in as well? Is that something that you're looking at, or do you think it's more like the mobility things are more important than the actual like outputs and things like that? And again, the reason that people from the baseball side say, hey, it's no big deal. I mean, there's obviously some gray area of where it becomes a big deal and where it's not is, the asymmetries are what allows some of these pitchers to throw 100 miles an hour. If they didn't have those asymmetries, they wouldn't throw 100 miles an hour. So, what's kind of your thought process on certain amount of asymmetries, good, bad, doesn't mean anything, does mean a lot? Like, how's that look?
So I flag asymmetry more than 10%. Okay. So if it's less than that, so I flag them as a yellow flag from 10 to 15. More than 15, I red flag them. So I allow that window of 10%, because even if I'm going to return them to sport, that's the window that I'm calling as fully capable to return to sport. You'll find like some guy has a history of chronic groin strains on the right. He could be 35% deficient compared to his left. It's insane. And he's a professional athlete.
Right.
And then we try to take a look at those profiles. I basically get a readout of all the players and all of their data. And if I want to look at more stuff, I can go into the programs and look at like specifics of it, their rate of force development of those things. But truly what most I'm looking at is peak force. I'm looking at how much pressure they can push through those pads. And if their right is significantly weaker than their left, then we know we need to intervene by trying to strengthen those either with isometrics, concentric training, something that's not going to make them sore that they can't practice, but also something that can be an in-season maintenance program, you could call it. So they all get pissed off at me because as soon as I looked at all these reports this year, I go, all right, I basically had something that there was 22 guys on our roster most time of the year. Maybe 19 of them needed something. And they're like, what the fuck? I'm fine. And I'm like, well, you might break down. This is what can help you. And I'm like, okay, well, so you have to really like sell it to them. This is, so if you show them, look, you're 30% weaker on your right. I don't know what to tell you. Well, let me retest. Okay, I'll test you again. He might be 27. I go, it wasn't the test, buddy. Like, you need to work on this. And then they kind of, if you show them the numbers, they're a little bit better. I will say that.
Yeah. So you mentioned like eccentric stuff in season, but I was actually thinking about eccentric stuff. So in the sport of hockey, just because of the idea of like, and I don't know how to think about this. I know they're making hard cuts sometimes, like where they're stopping, but
Yeah.
I never really thought about this fact. Like, it's not the same as like a cut, like in basketball or football. I feel like where you're like, because you mentioned like even like with the ACL, you're kind of even though you're cutting, you're kind of sliding across the ice. Like, do you guys look at like eccentric rate of force development? Is that something that's a factor in terms of injuries? I mean, are they getting, is there still an aspect of the eccentric component of things that they need to be doing from a preventative and from a performance standpoint?
So there's, let me see if I can remember them all, because there's like 5 or 6 metrics that I look at for counter movement jump and for the plyo push up. One being height. That's the easy one that we show the
Right.
GM, because
Right.
this guy can jump 18, that guy can jump 20. Okay. Heights, whatever. Then we look at peak concentric force, peak eccentric force, braking rate of force development,
Right.
eccentric rate of force development, and hold on, I'm gonna deceleration rate of force development. We look at all those.
Okay.
And we have our guys jump every 2 to 3 weeks, so I can track it over the season. And if I see that, we look for trends of fatigue. Basically, this guy jumped 25 at camp. He's down to 22 now. He's back to 23. He's back to 21. Why is that? Is it because his force is bad? Is it because his rate of force is his force the same, but his rate of force development's low? So we have to train. We'll switch. Whether it's their peak force, we train for strength. Their rate is down and they're not getting up, we train for speed and kind of adjust their program as needed. So those are like the 5, 6 key metrics I look at on those plates. I mean, it spits out 95, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You can look at a million things. I met with a couple like force plate gurus, and those are like the ones that they all agree upon are like the most important. You can also look at RSI as well. It's another big one. But if I look at too many things, I just get confused. So I keep it down to those.
I agree. And, and that's, it's definitely like very easy to be like have the paralysis by analysis kind of set in. And that's something that, again, when I was, and I don't want to talk ill of any organization, but when I was with the Yankees, they were just collecting data just to collect it, and it's almost like they didn't really do much with it. Like especially at the level that I was at when I was with the GCL teams, like, I mean, you got 17-year-old, 18-year-old Venezuelan kids that have never touched a weight in their life anyway. So it's like whatever their force plate is, it's not, they're a teenager. So it doesn't really affect a whole lot of what they're going to do anyways. Versus when I was with the Rockies, it was very cut and dry. Obviously, they used Sparta, so it was kind of like, very limited in terms of what data we were getting. But what I liked about it was it kept it simple, and it gave us a plan. It might not be the plan that I was agreed with, but it gave us a plan that we kind of stuck with, and it gave us a route that we put the athletes on. So I guess kind of in that sense, how much, oversight is, like, you're getting the metrics. I assume obviously the strength coach is getting the metrics. How much oversight is there between, what they're doing with you from a prehab standpoint versus what they're doing with the strength? Like if they need to strengthen up their adductors, is that something they're going to do more with you from a prehab standpoint, or is that going to be something they're going to do more with the strength staff in terms of like individualizing I assume every guy pretty much has an individualized training program then at that point, but how much of it is, prehab? I don't know if you like that term or not, but prehab versus actually like in the weight room, like, hey, we're going to go in and just, squat, bench, deadlift, regardless of what my hip mobility is.
I would say that the more individualized stuff based off nuances of strength falls into my realm. Sometimes it gets lost and I have to just program it for them and say, go do it, because I can't be treating a guy on the table and then also holding some guy's hand, tell him to do a Copenhagen.
Right.
Um, so I have to lean on the assistant strength coaches a little bit to kind of get guys, come on, let's go do the stuff Brandon told you to do, and just making sure their form is good. But then from a team aspect, when we do a team lift, it's not completely individual. It's mostly this is the lift the whole team is doing. Hey, you might have a bad shoulder. You can't do this exercise. Brandon gave me these 3 things for you to do instead. Hey, this is a little bit more strength based, but we're more concerned about power for this guy. So we're going to actually have him do speed deadlifts or
Right.
like velocity based squat training. But a lot of that falls under my realm of the rehab, and we call it like the warm up because they say,
Right.
well, I'm training twice now. What the fuck? Well, you're making millions of dollars. You're fine. You can
Yeah.
spend 15 minutes with doing the rehab stuff. So yeah, but it is tough. Sometimes it gets lost in translation because they're like, I'm already training. Why am I working out too? Well, you're doing isometrics. Like you can still do the team lift as well.
Yeah. Um, so then I guess, this is something that I'm sure it's similar to how it was when I was in baseball. But like you guys are playing what, usually 2 to 3, 4 games a week, obviously with travel and stuff all in there. What is the typical, if you were to go like you're at a homestand, then you go on a road trip,
Yeah.
what does the lifting schedule kind of look like? Are you guys training like in minor league baseball? Most of the time we were training a couple hours before the games. Like we'd get the guys like 11 to 1, we train, and then they wouldn't play until 7. Pro baseball, I know it's usually, or big league baseball, I know it's depending on what the players want. A lot of the guys like to lift after games. What's your guys' kind of schedule look like? Obviously, I know this is more of an S&C question, but what is kind of just what's a day-to-day look like for the players? I guess is a probably better way to ask.
If you look at it by the week, I guess you should say they could play anywhere from 2 to 4 games in a week, average being 3. What we try to accomplish in that week is a minimum of 1 lift, sometimes 2. If usually what happens is if we have 2 days in between games, the first day's off. Like the players get the day off. The second day they're going to have a pre-practice workout, usually focused on power, a little bit of strengthening, preparing them for the ice. On the counter of that, say we play a back-to-back and we're getting the next day off, or we are playing a game and we get the next day off. Typically what we're going to have is a post-game lift, whether it be 4 to 6 exercises, 3 to 4 sets, nothing crazy, but at least just a maintenance program. They know they're getting the day off the next day, so they don't complain as much. If you get if you get 7 lifts in a month, that's good in season, which seems like not a lot, but it's just so much abuse to their bodies time after time. And there are guys that play less minutes. Say the big guys play 20, 25 minutes in a game, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a lot. And then some guys might play 8 to 10. Those guys that play under 10 are working out after the game, no matter what. And then if you're a scratch, if you're a consistent scratch, they program an in-season cycle for you. So say you're getting scratched week after week, you're just kind of the extra guy on the team. They're actually putting them through like a normal cycle. So they're able to stay in shape just in case they're ever needed. So yeah, training falls by the wayside because of how many games there are, but we try to maintain it as much as possible without doing too much and making them tired and not letting them perform at night.
Okay. All the testing that you guys do at the beginning of the season, what are some realistic like changes? Like how much like are you that guy that might have a 35% decrease in his groin from one side to the other? Like is that something that because of just the demands of the sport, because he's going to continue to get thousands of reps of playing, how much influence, like, is it something that you're just hoping that it doesn't go from 35 to 38%, or can you get it from 35 down to 25 throughout the course of, your guys' seasons end up being 8-9 months long, especially this year, you guys making it all the way to the conference finals. Like how much, I guess, what's a realistic expectation? Like, I know when I was in pro baseball, like we didn't expect guys to get stronger, which as a strength coach is like the most frustrating thing ever. Cause it's like, that's my whole job. But it's like, if you don't get weaker, it's kind of a win. So it's one of those things like, what's your realistic expectations for stuff like that?
If we're looking at like those deficits we talked about that are enormous, I'm looking for them to bridge the gap. If we're talking about this player that has no abnormalities, came into camp in great shape, management and coaches are happy with how he looks on day one, you're basically trying to keep him at day one and hold on to it as long as you can throughout the season, and they're going to go down. If you took if we got isometric testing on these guys 6 months later, there's no chance they're higher.
Right.
Like, let's be honest, they're going to be lower, but it's just holding that threshold as long as you can and trying to eliminate that fall off, because there's really no time to train. And then in the American League in hockey, they play typically 2 to 3 days a week, but they'll play like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so they can train in the week. Or they play Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. They'll play 3 and 4 or 3 and 3, and they can actually individualize their programs Monday through Wednesday, Monday through Thursday, and actually accomplish strengthening. For us, we could play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. Like, it just goes, it's nonstop. So we look at the calendar for the month, and kind of me and the strength coaches will look, as well as the head trainer, like, we think this is probably a good day to train. We think this day is going to be off. We should probably train after the game here. And they kind of, once they get the month schedule from the coaches of what they want to do for the plan, then they sit down and go, and they program the month. This is when we're training. This is when we're jump testing. This is when we're doing a post-game lift. And here's what we're going to focus those lifts on. We're going to focus on power this morning. We're going to focus on strength, hypertrophy after the game. And they do it month by month, essentially.
I gotcha. No, that's pretty cool. And honestly, it's very similar to the biggest thing with us when I was in pro baseball with the minor leagues is, like you have a little bit longer of a stretch. Like you said, you guys might be in New York, and then the next game is going to, a day and a half later, you're going to be in some other city across the country. Yeah. Versus minor league baseball, you're going to at least play 3 or 4 games. You can at least get, our minimum was 2 full body lifts a week. So that's, you're at least home for one of those lifts, and then on the road for one of those lifts. So kind of, again, talking about that, like, high performance team, from a rehab standpoint, and kind of tying it into like the sports psych side of things, because obviously that's kind of that pillar of that high performance stuff that's really growing in the last 10, 15 years, probably the most. How much discussion do you have, if a guy has like a legit traumatic injury, or he's out for, misses a whole season or half a season or whatever, or even, I guess, even guys that are just missing shorter periods of time than that, but how much, what's that conversation look like between you and the sports psych and that athlete, the GM, the head coach, the strength coach? Like, how do you, from your position at least, how do you make sure that you're keeping that athlete mentally, engaged and understand that, they just gotta bite the bullet and do the shitty stuff, even though and there's a kid on our basketball team right now that I'm thinking of that's, this next month or two of summer training might be the make or break for him to ever play basketball again. And it's just because he's kind of lost that willpower. So how do you make sure that you're, making sure guys don't do that?
So I try to keep things engaging, obviously. I see them 7 days a week, sometimes hours on end. What we run into is, if it's an extended period of time and I feel like their mood or effort is declining, sometimes I'll go speak to our sports psychologist and not like tell him to go see her, but just say, hey, so-and-so is kind of just going through the motions right now. Is there maybe you just pop by and ask them how things are going, and they'll just start a discussion that way and try to peel some information off of them to see. What happens is they start to get a little down, because if we have a long-term injury, say they're out for a month, they're probably not traveling for the first 2 or 3 weeks of that. And they're like, what the hell? I'm stuck at home. I don't know what to do. I'm bored. Like, that completely throws their schedule for a loop. So they don't understand that, yes, you need to be at the rink. So there's times where someone's out and the team's on the road, and I might stay home, and we could be at the rink 2, 3, 4 hours, because we're doing manual therapy, we're doing modalities, we're doing rehab. They're going to train the opposite extremity. They're going to train upper body. If they got a lower body injury, we're going to have them do recovery stuff. There's so much we can do to try to increase the speed of their return, because every day is dollars is the way the GM looks at it. Every game that that guy misses, I'm wasting money. So
Right.
they look at it as from a financial standpoint that I need him back as soon as possible because I'm burning salary cap dollars by the day. Um,
Right.
you have to do everything in your power to get them back, but also you don't want to return them early and then they just get hurt again in a week. So we kind of explain to them. Usually, what I'll do is if they have we call it we'll call it a MCL, and we say, oh, they're going to be out 4 weeks. I don't know. We'll just throw out a number. I lay out the plan for them right from the start. This week we're going to do this. This week we're going to progress to this. This week we're going to do this. You might go shorter, you might go longer by a day or two in each one of these phases, but I'm going to phase out every part of this rehab now so you have an expectation of what it's going to be. Because if you're just shooting from the hip, they're going to be like, what the hell? Well, there's no plan behind this.
Right.
And the last thing you want to do is have them get agents involved and additional people and outside resources. And that's when you get to a whole nother thing that you want to avoid as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Is that something that, because I know in pro baseball, like I said, especially the two organizations that I was with, you kind of saw some polar opposites. The Yankees, there's like half their big league guys didn't have to do anything if they didn't want to.
Yeah.
The Rockies were a little bit better about that because they had a lot more homegrown talent. It was nothing to see like Nolan Arenado when he was with him, like in the weight room 5 days a week during spring training doing something. And then you had, I forget who the one Japanese pitcher we had at one point in time. He literally had like a little posse that followed him around everywhere he went. He only ever did like arms and shoulders. Like that's all he ever did. Never did anything the Rockies strength coaches wanting to do. So is that something that's common in the NHL where these guys have, once they've at that level, they have free reign. If they just want to say, fuck off to the strength coaches, they don't have to do that? Or is that something that's not as much at that level or at least in that sport?
They are, I would say they're pretty good. They are going to bitch and can question, but they're always going to do it. Let's go with that. You might have a couple guys slip through the cracks on a team workout. You might get 20 out of 22 and the other two guys kind of slip through the cracks, but the compliance is pretty good.
Yeah.
And it all starts with the culture of the team, and it starts with the leadership of that team. If the captain's doing the lift, you probably should be doing the lift.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But they look to the older, more, higher salaried players, and they follow their lead.
Right.
Because if it's the young kids are always going to do what you tell them. They're never going to say anything. Then you get to the role players that are older. They're probably going to do it. You get to the superstars. If those guys are doing it, everyone's doing it. If a few of those guys are saying no, so you really have to get buy-in from the superstars in our league.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Let me see. I want to just kind of keep it. I want to keep it to like right around an hour. I guess let's kind of switch it over because obviously, like part of this for me, for my staff, like the people that have been a part of my staff or are currently on my staff, they're all young coaches, and I want to make sure that we kind of touch on a couple things like that. What would maybe be some things that like you look back at? So you've been in hockey now for 7, 8 years, 9 years?
8, yeah,
8 years. So what's maybe some things that 8 years ago that, and obviously the cliche answer is I wouldn't tell myself to do anything different because you wouldn't be where you're at. But like, what are maybe some things that maybe you made some mistakes on? And you don't have to get into like specifics, but like maybe some things that you made mistakes in terms of like, I'm better at this now because of mistakes I made, when I was with Tampa or when I was with Dallas or whatever it was. Like, what are some of the biggest things that maybe can save some of my assistants like the same mistakes? Like, is it whatever?
I would say as with my rehab and even when I was a strength coach with Tampa that I didn't spend as much time focusing on tempo for strengthening and building muscle and injury prevention stuff. So sometimes the guys call me a Nazi because I'm like counting the eccentric count on these lifts, and they're shorting me by a second or two. That makes an enormous difference for time under tension if they short me 3 seconds on every rep. So I think that I've even evolved over the years. Like I kind of went away from isometrics and I've come way back to them. I'm using them for so much stuff now, overcoming and yielding isometrics. I think they're great for building a foundation of strength. So I think that I've done a better job as I've gotten older and read more research and learned more from other people that just getting back to basics is almost better than getting fancy with some of this other stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that seems silly to some people, but you're going to generate force and create strength by building the muscle. I can't affect how they play hockey, but I can get them stronger, I can get them faster, and I can prevent them from getting hurt. It's the coaches and the players' job to get better on the ice. So we do everything in our power to make them the best athlete that they can be, and then they have to apply it on their sport. So we try to individualize things and make them better, but just my mistake would be there's times where I fall in ruts and I don't read. And I always tell everybody that my PT teacher, my teacher I had in PT school is like, you'll never know everything. And everyone knows that. It's a cliche thing to say, but there's always changing research too. Like there might be stuff we're doing right now that in 10 years, we're like, what the hell were we doing 10 years ago? Why, like, this was much better. So just constantly trying to review and learn, reaching out to other strength coaches, other physios. So that, back to the ASH test we talked about, Ben Ashworth came to New York and taught us for 2 days. We brought him from England to teach us and the Knicks staff. And it was unbelievable to learn about how he looks at shoulder rehab from not only a physiologic standpoint, but muscle strengthening standpoint and kind of the metric stuff that he does.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I've kind of, I just don't feel bad asking people's questions. That's why I don't have any problem with you asking me to do this talk, because this is how I learn too.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is that's, I do this call and I say it's for all of my assistants and interns and stuff, but really it's equally as much for me as it is for them. And it keeps me like, I think that's the hardest part, especially being in my role as being like the head strength coach and having all of my coach. Like, I mean, I'm in my 10th year of coaching and every one of my coaches is like in year 1, 2, or 3, maybe, you know, so it's like, sometimes it can be very easy for me to like get comfortable. So like the thing that I have to make sure I do is like, I need to make sure that I'm constantly educating myself. And if it means pretending that I'm educating my young coaches, it also helps me as much as it does them, if anything. So I guess, one of the other questions I like to ask is like, when you were a young practitioner, young PT, getting a job with the Lightning, like, what do you think? And then this is for anybody, if you're hiring, I assume you maybe have a role in hiring some of the strength coaches, some of the athletic trainers and some of the PTs that work alongside you. What do you guys, what's something that you look for? Like, what are some key things that you look for? Not obviously everybody's going to have the education, everybody's going to have the experience, but what are some other like personality traits, characteristics that you look for that have made you a good practitioner and make people that you hire good practitioners, good coaches?
I mean, like you said, you go to school, you're going to learn. You can go to the worst school, you can go to the best school. It doesn't mean anything. The biggest thing for me is your personality and the way you work with other people. If you're not willing to evolve or adapt to how other people are, like when I came to New York, I was a strength coach in Tampa, and I had to kind of back myself off of that. I wasn't programming for people. And I adapted to where now I'm a blended role where I assist them and I kind of work as the transition, but we work side by side all day. If I have any questions about an athlete, I just walk into his office and talk to him. You need to be approachable and you need to be able to communicate as much as possible, especially in sports. The GM can walk down my hallway any second and say, what's going on with this player? I need everything. Tell me everything about him. When's he coming back? How's he doing? You need to be prepared at all times for that, because the owner could call and be like, how's Chris Kreider, our forward? How's he doing? Blah, 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 blah. You need to be able to rattle that off immediately. And if you're unprepared, that's when you get burned.
Yeah.
So obviously you create good relationships with these players and they create buy-in for your role. Before me and the new head trainer got here this year, the culture somewhat was we just deal with things, and now we're trying to get ahead of those things. And now guys are realizing that the more they do in prevention, the better their seasons are going to be and the better their chance of not getting hurt is. And that's the shift I think we've seen in all sports, that everyone used to just play through everything. And now we're trying to mitigate that by injury prevention. And it seems boring, but it's important.
No, yeah, I think it's awesome. Let's see. Does anybody, I know, like I said, apologies. There's more people on here just with the way today's schedule was. Tyler, Luke, Ryan, you guys got any questions for Brandon?
Yeah, are there any like major differences that you've noticed in either prehab or just like returning to play when you were with the Stars versus being with the Rangers?
I would say that from Dallas and Tampa compared to New York, we are a lot more objectively measured here. They want data on everything. We have we have more staff, so we're able to accomplish that. But it allows us to have a clearer picture for return to play if we do know that they are achieving these thresholds for return to play. Before I had a handheld dynamometer, I had force plates. I didn't have a force frame or a Kangatech. I had a number of tools, and it was more of a judgment call by the coach and myself that we thought he was ready. Now we have a performance director that says, I need concrete data that says they're coming back. So it's kind of depends on where the role, like where you're at. We're fortunate enough to have every toy in the book to be able to create that atmosphere for these guys. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, the world of sports and performance is definitely changing to just your general programming. I feel like it's getting very data driven. I might be wrong, but I feel like you guys are probably the same way. Everyone wants to put a number to something.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely something that we can't do as much at Fairmont with just the resources and things that we have, and even really the time constraints is a big one. That's when I talked to the guy last Friday from Output, and he's telling me all about their platform and stuff. And I'm like, look, man, I was like, sometimes I have to get 100 football players through the weight room. I have 3 jump mats. Like that's going to be way more efficient than switching the output bands on and off to do vertical jump. So it's just one of those things where like that's to me a lot of times at Fairmont it's dollars and then it's just time and efficiency. And that's just football. Like that's not all the other sports that we test stuff on as well. So
I think that's where you basically elect to choose what do you think are the 3 most important things you want to track. For me, it's vertical jump, plyometric push-up. That's really all I need to see, if I'm being honest. And maybe a max isometric squat, but we don't do that in season. We do the other 2 in season. And I use those because I'm getting speed and I'm getting force. And those are the 2 things that we train in sport and in the gym.
Yeah. Do you see like trends? And I would assume you do, but do you see trends with guys that don't perform well on the ASH test that also then have deficits on like the plyo push-up because they have some sort of shoulder stability issues or strength issues or whatever it may be?
From the plyo push-up, I feel like more complaints come from it bothers my wrist. And it's just because they're motor morons and catch it weird on their wrist. But I tell them, just do a push-up and I don't care about how high you get. I care about how much you push into that plate. They're concerned about like touching the ceiling on a push-up. I'm like, it's impossible. You're going to get 10 inches off, if that. I want to see how much force you can get through the plate. Don't worry about your wrist. And if you have a wrist issue, we just kind of nix it. If you have a knee issue, if we just nix the jump test and we do it in a month, like it's fine.
Yeah.
But the other thing is you fall into the trap of effort. If we lost a game, the last couple games, guys like, oh, we got jump testing today.
Yep.
And you're like, well, we got to do this because we want to track to see how you're doing. So if it's a shit test, then it's just bad data. And you have to be able to throw that out and just be like, they weren't trying. Like, let's look at let's look at the 10 guys that gave it all and then look at their fatigue factors. We can't make a call off a guy who came in and was upset about something and they just hopped off the plate and didn't even try.
Yeah. I do want to, if you got time, I do want to ask you quickly about the workload thing. So what are you guys looking at in terms of like, are you measuring some sort of acute to chronic ratio? Are you looking for like a certain percentage and spike in that? And you kind of maybe will limit guys practice minutes or game minutes, or, are there trends? And if we have this much of a spike, there's this chance of an injury risk. Like what is the biggest kind of takeaways, kind of overview of the workload aspect?
So we look at training impulse is our number one metric that we kind of give to the coaches because they can understand it's a round number usually. And we look at trimp and trimp per minute, how much impulse they were getting per minute, how physiologically demanding that practice was.
How is impulse calculated? I think I know, but I don't know if anybody else.
We use a first beat heart rate monitor, so it's tracking their heart rate, and it basically tracks the spikes in heart rate and how much. It's hard to explain because I'm not a cardiophysiologist, but their heart rate gives us a number called trimp and trimp per minute based off their heart rate and heart rate capacity, and there's workload zones. So we have an iPad that we set next to the ice.
Okay, so the workload's more based off heart rate, not as much off of like change of direction and speed and things like that.
So we also have a Connexon chip inside every one of their shoulder pads.
Okay.
When I worked for Tampa, we used Zephyr, which gave us a mechanical and physiologic load as well as heart rate all in one device.
Yep.
Here we use 2 different devices. So the Connexon is a GPS positional tracker that tracks accelerations, high-speed accelerations, decelerations, speed, and it gives us kind of a physiologic and mechanical workload based off their size and how much they moved out there. It tracks time on ice. So basically, as soon as they step on the ice, there's cameras around the practice facility that pick up that chip, and it knows exactly. Like I can watch them on the screen, just little dots moving around.
Yep.
So that spits out, and we have a platform where it tracks their mechanical and physiologic loads, and we kind of just watch the trends. So we look at player by player. They have their own chart, and then we have a team chart that we look at the trends. So if we see that we had 3 tough practices in a row or 2 or whatever, we say, coach, maybe dial it down a little bit because the guys are starting to trend this way. Along with that, because we use the Connexon device, it's a chip. During gameplay, they can't wear any wearables. It's against the rules.
Wow.
So then you're like, well, shit, I'm not getting data every other day because they play every other day. So how am I supposed to watch it? And we can't force them to wear the heart rate. So compliance depends on the day. But what we do have in the jerseys, in the back of the jerseys, are called SMT chips that are GPS positional trackers. That we get the raw data from the league because they use that to look at how fast the player skates, how hard the puck is shot, and like distance traveled. And we extract, I don't know who does this for us. We have some company that extracts that data and puts it next to our Connexon data and basically turns this SMT data to Connexon data for the same chart.
Jesus, that's crazy.
It's math that I don't understand, but it allows us to continue to track them.
Is that some sort of like collecting bargaining agreement where somehow the players they can't be forced? I mean, obviously they can't be forced to do a lot of stuff, but I mean, in terms of like where they don't want to be wearing, like, just make it easier on everybody and they just wear the LPS like them's already.
The wearables are a huge topic for the CBA and the PA because the Players Association is concerned that those numbers will be used against them in negotiating contracts. You don't try and practice, why would we sign you to 8 years? So all of that data that they take during the practices is completely voluntary. And some teams got a little too, they took a little bit too much data and handed it out to too many people. And then the Players Association came down on those teams like, what the hell are you doing? So it's a very tricky situation with wearable technology in this league.
Yeah, no, I can see it from both sides. I can definitely see it from the player side, especially when you're talking, dealing with millions of dollars. Like, I can definitely understand it.
If they all wore it every day, I feel like it could only benefit them.
Right.
But you're never going to convince them of that.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, man, I have probably 1,000 more questions, and maybe we'll have to do this again at some other point in time.
Yeah, no worries.
But I really appreciate it, and I'm glad we got to connect. I wish we would have probably done it sooner, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If you're ever back, how often do you come back home?
So my parents moved away now, so they're in Pittsburgh. So I haven't been there in a while. Every now and then I'll go see a couple of friends, but I was in Florida forever, so I haven't been back in a while, actually.
Yeah.
We'll have to catch up sometime.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm only an hour from Pittsburgh, so if you're ever back just visiting your parents or whatever, and you're around or driving through this way or whatever, just let me know. But yeah, it was good to connect. We'll definitely stay in touch. I appreciate you doing that.
If you have any additional questions about anything, I'm I'm not the best at explaining things sometimes, so just shoot me a text and I'll try to explain it a little bit further for you.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I might even if I might even have you maybe put me in contact with your guys' head strength coach or one of your assistant strength coaches just to kind of dive into that side of things a little bit as well at some point.
Okay.
But yeah, appreciate it. What does your guys like? I guess I can ask this real quick. What's your guys like summer look like? What in terms of schedule, off season? How many guys kind of are still at the facility throughout the summer and things like that?
Yeah, most of our guys go back to where their home is, Europe, Canada, across the United States. And they'll spend the majority of their summers there till kind of late August, sometimes early September. We do have a couple of guys that live here all year round, so there's a couple guys that train at a gym in Stamford, Connecticut, and a couple guys that actually train at our facility all summer. So I won't be working every day. Let's go with that. It's nice.
Yeah.
I do have one guy rehabbing right now, kind of the next week or so, and then probably be pretty quiet for a month, and then it kind of picks back up in August slowly. Like one guy comes in, another guy comes in, and it kind of builds, and then we don't staff everyone there at all times. We basically have one or two people there, one strength coach, one trainer, and then as we get more people, we kind of increase and ramp up our availability for them.
Gotcha.
So hopefully get some time to relax.
Yeah,
It's a
no, for
long
sure.
season.
Their seasons are insanely long. I know when I was in minor league baseball, it's like you're like at the All-Star break and you're like, holy shit, we still have like 3.5 months of season left. So it's really the travel. The travel is what kills you. If you could just play home games every day, it'd be amazing. But the travel is what kills you.
Yeah, especially for our travel, it's city, 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 city. It's not like you go to one city, you play 2 or 3 games. Like
Right.
if we go on a long road trip, we could play like one we had this year was Seattle, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg in 10 days.
Oh,
Luckily, it was like early fall. It wasn't winter yet, so it wasn't snow yet. Thank God.
yeah. Wow. That's crazy. I mean, it's cool, but it's also, it's cool to go to those cities, but you really don't get time to actually enjoy them. Like
You might get out for dinner. That's about it.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, Brandon, it was good catching up with you. Appreciate this. And like I said, looking forward to staying in touch.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good one, guys. Thank you.
Have a good one. Thanks.